All right, guys, welcome to the Good Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Watson, and in today's episode, I'm speaking with Colin R Turner. He's an author, musician, and a social activist. He's got two books out. One's called F-Day, The Second Dawn of Man, and Into the Open Economy, which has been translated into many languages. He's also the founder of the freeworldcharter, which is a petition that advocates 10 guiding principles for a money-free world, which has been viewed by many millions of people and endorsed by people from practically every country in the world. So first of all, Colin, thanks for agreeing to chat with me today.
Thanks, Rob. It's great to be on. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm really happy to be here.
Great stuff. So I think one thing that drew to me, I said it just before we started speaking, that I watched your TED Talk, which I'll put a link to in the show notes to everyone to check it out. And I was just really inspired by it. And I've, it kind of aligned with some of my own sort of thinking and issues with the world. But I think rather than delve into it too much, if you can just give a bit of an overview of what the Free World Charter is and how it kind of came about.
Sure. Yeah, the Free World Charter is something that is a website that I created in 2010, 2011. And it really was inspired by things like the Zeitgeist movement or the Venus Project, which were advocating post-money society. And I felt that a lot of those organizations were lacking some sort of core operating principles, for want of a better phrase, as to how such a society would operate. And I sort of gave myself the task to sort of imagine what those core guiding principles would be. And over a long period of time and research, I eventually came up with those 10 principles of the Charter, which are basically outlining our best practices, best behavior, really, for creating optimum outcome for every person and every being on Earth. That's basically the short and the long and the short of it. That it's a way of basically what is the optimum way that we need to behave in order to create the best outcome for environment and for ourselves, and obviously for our planetary cohabitants, which are very important too. So the Free World Charter, sprang from that, and it kind of snowballed really kind of straight away. It was good. Where the Zeitgeist movement picked it up, and a lot of the other guys like the Ubuntu, who you mentioned before, they picked it up and they were sharing it around. So there was there was quite a big buzz at the time around this kind of topic. So it's really starting 2012 and then going right through 2014, 2015, we had a lot of traction there. And then come into 2015, because we were relying so heavily on social media for traction, when Facebook changed their rules 2015, 2016, it hit us hard, and it hit hard a lot of guys who are working in that kind of space, because we're not, we don't have budgets to promote our things, which is obviously what Facebook they wanted people to do. So I would say that it was really accelerating for quite a few years until sort of kind of plateaued down sort of 2016, 2017. And obviously I've been busy in other projects as well. And I saw the opportunity come up to do a TEDx talk in Galway early last year. And I applied for it, and a few people proposed me for it as well, which was nice. So yeah, I got to get up there and more or less make a very brief synopsis of the sort of vision that I and probably you are kind of campaigning for. And it was really, really well received. I was really happy about that. I wanted to make it something very simple and accessible for people to understand. So the title of the talk was just called "What Would Happen If Everything Was Free," and that's really kind of it's an accessible springboard for people to sort of get into that idea, to kind of experiment with that thought. And I think I capitulated it quite well there on the night, so I was happy with that. But also surprisingly had a lot of enthusiastic support from people there in the theater there in Galway where I did it. Actually, was people were coming up and shaking my hand, kind of say, "Wow, you're absolutely right. I never thought about that." And that was a surprise. I was more or less thinking that it would be met with quite a lot of skepticism. But no, it was actually really received really well. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, great. I've you said about a few of the things, Zeitgeist movement. I remember watching that. I think it was Peter Joseph, wasn't it, who created those series of documentaries, and they really kind of, I'd say, like shook me awake a little bit. I think I was, for quite a few years, I was like, things feel off. The way the system's in place, you start to question the path that we're on. Like my own experiences, since birth, were kind of sold what an idea of success looks like. And that very much involves getting the job, getting the car, buying a big house, going down that route. And then supposedly that's meant to be the idea of success. But then you're left with this big gaping hole of thinking, actually, no, there's something really missing there. And I was going around seeking and scratching everywhere, trying to understand stuff. And I think around that time, 2011, everything was kind of exploding a bit on the internet, building up to 2012. There's a lot of sort of prophecies around 2012. And I think maybe that's a bit of a turning point for humanity. But watching the Zeitgeist movement and then that led me onto the Venus Project, and then eventually the Ubuntu movement, and then seeing what you're doing. But yeah, it is a shame what you're saying about how the algorithms have changed on Facebook, because I follow another group called Collective Evolution, and they had millions and millions of followers. And the way they've changed the algorithms, barely any of the content gets seen anymore. So it's really frustrating from that perspective. It's kind of like it's been nipped in the bud by the powers that be.
Absolutely
frustrating. But these seeds have certainly been planted. So how do you see, how do you see a world without money? What maybe for people who are maybe listening to this and who are as if they were just coming to this from the first perspective, like if they're so entrained with thinking, well, money's what I think we've been told, haven't we? Money makes the world go round. We've been told that belief since such a young age, when actually, in fact, it feels like it's more like it's people and the creative endeavors that make the world go round, and, the resources that are available. And we've been going on this kind of death economy for so long. I think John Perkins speaks about that we need to shift from a death economy to a life economy. But yours goes way further than that, because it's almost the end of money. So what does it kind of look like?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to rewind a little bit there of what you were saying about when you're watching the Zeitgeist movement and the Venus Project, like back in that time, sort of, it was quite a fertile time for these ideas, 2011, 2012. But if you actually rewind a little bit further back, if you go back to, say, 2008, you had the banking crash. And then even before that again, then you had like this meteoric rise of the internet, and also the sudden possibilities of free stuff. Like you had sites like Napster and MySpace and all these other things where were basically offering like massive amounts of free content, which we had never imagined before, And this had a huge impact on, of course, a lot of the artistic and creative industries, like music, which is one that affected me, of course, directly. And of course, like newspapers and journalism, all that sort of stuff, these have all been really hit hard by the advent of free content. So against the backdrop of this sudden new technology that was offering us all this great stuff for free, then and then a few years later, then you had the banking crash, and you suddenly realize what a bloody swindle was going on, how much money, obscene money, people were making basically off the backs of other people's misery. People were getting thrown out of their houses while other people were making millions off their loans. And I think that disparity between, or not the disparity, but really the confluence of this kind of massive amount of free content coming online and the sudden apparent injustice in the system that we were all operating under, I think that was really like a flashpoint for creating the sort of rise in this kind of thinking that we see. But yeah, in terms of the money-free world, how does the money-free world work? Yeah, I know John Perkins, of course, and I admire his work as well. And it depends really, when you talk about a money-free society, it kind of depends on who you listen to really a lot, because Michael Tellinger and Ubuntu have one particular methodology, Venus Project might have another, and Peter Joseph another again. But my own personal way of viewing it has kind of evolved somewhat since since I set out in my journey, say in 2011, where I was more or less advocating, okay, look, technology is just going to surpass the market system, and we're just going to employ robots and automation to more or less to do everything, to be our slaves basically, and we can just relax and live the high life, and and write crappy poetry and this sort of stuff. But I've come back from that a little bit. I'm much more skeptical now than I was then about technology and how it can be really leveraged to liberate us, because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the technology is not liberating us as much as we would like, because once we solve one basic problem, then we create another layer of sort of services. For example, for example, if you imagine like a few hundred years ago, maybe your most important job was to get up and dig the ground to plant your food. And of course, that's all not unheard of nowadays. Almost no one grows their own food. But now we have this other layer of other necessities, things that we have to do, like the jobs that we have to engage in, whatever that is. And a lot of these tend to be service jobs, which are non-essential. But it shows that the more we progress technologically, it doesn't actually tend to free us as much as we would like to think. Maybe it frees us from hard labor and the really tough jobs, but it creates other opportunities for us to keep getting engaged. And of course, when everything is set against a backdrop of the market system, then of course that's always the way it's going to go. You're going to say, okay, I have a new innovation now, so how can I market this? How can I sell it? How can I get 1 million users for my product or whatever? And that's always the way it's going to go, because the thinking is always based around, okay, how are we going to make this marketable? How are we going to make it a success? As you say, you mentioned earlier about success. So we are still, as you mentioned before we came on, you're still sort of ingrained with this idea that, your life must be a success. You have to perform certain functions to make your life a success. And of course, in this day and age, success equals big bank account. So, like I say, I'm more skeptical of the technological side of things, because I also think that a lot of the connection between people is actually being lost through technology. We say, like, we have Facebook, where we have billions of people connected all over the world, which is fantastic, but it's also creating a kind of physical disconnection between people, which is something that I think is quite sad, Yeah. Okay, thanks. And what we have to do, I think, sorry, I'm just somebody's leaving there. The Facebook basically, and all the social media technology has basically brought people together, but it's also made us more physically distant. I don't know if you've heard these like news stories of young men in Japan who basically are hermits living in their small flats, and they're technologically connected to everyone, but they actually almost never leave their flats, which is quite sad, And a lot of them, of course, have have depression and anxiety and all that sort of stuff. So for me, it's not so simple as, okay, let's just build great machines and let's just have an easy life. It's more about, well, we have to think about what actually do we want to achieve? What is the end goal? And is the end goal just doing nothing? Well, I don't think that's a good end goal. I think the end goal obviously should be to be happy and to be fulfilled. I think everyone would agree with that. So I'm leaning more towards trying to rebuild communities and trying to encourage cooperation, encourage sharing between people, and making that sort of the primary approach towards money-free world. Is that basically if we all start sharing and cooperating more, we create this new precedent for type of behavior, which can lead us into a money-free world. And of course, we can leverage technology any way we want. But the point is that if we should prioritize working together again and being cooperative, because I think that really is in our nature. We're a social species, of course, And we're just happier and we feel better when we're working with other people, in general. So my thinking now is what I promote nowadays is called an open access economy, which is something similar to a resource-based economy, except it's in reverse, where the resource-based economy might say, let's leverage science and technology to create a better world, and everyone's happier that way. Where I would say, okay, well, let's start working together and cooperating and use technology as well, secondary. So that's the main difference between that. So I imagine that a money-free world is a world where basically we have more vibrant communities, people connected to each other, people sharing goods and services, and eventually that if enough of us do that, it can fill out to bring in all the large corporations and all the massive institutions that we rely on, that eventually they will fall to this way of thinking as well. At least that's my theory.
It reminds me a little bit the Buckminster Fuller quote about, it's not about transforming the current systems in place, it's about creating new ones. And by creating the new ones, you make the old ones obsolete. And it feels very much at the moment that the systems are buckling under the weight. They're way too big. Like you talk about the banking system in 2008. It's not really been solved. It's just, debt has just got higher and higher the last 12 years. The political systems in place, the control, how it's very much a top-down approach. So yeah, it just feel like what you're talking about and what other people are talking about is like, it's a grassroots movement. It's turning it on its head rather than it being a top-down approach. It's people in the community making their own decisions for their own life. And
yeah, I think it's really important to make the distinction between what kind of revolution we're talking about here. It's not, as you say, where we all just go out and protest the streets, and then the government crumbles, and then they create this whole new society. I think that's really, really unlikely that that's going to happen. And also, it's not. I don't believe, as I said earlier, that like science and technology will just become so overwhelming that the market will just crumble under the weight of it. I don't really necessarily believe that will happen either, because there's always new financial and business opportunities, no matter what technology you throw out there. And that's a fact basically for the last 60 years. So if you talk about like a resource-based economy based on science and technology, well, I mean, that science and technology has been around for at least 30 years. And of course, it hasn't precipitated that society. So yeah, exactly. I think what we're talking about is it's not so much a revolution of like a sudden dramatic change. It's more like a gradual shift and a constant shift, moving from one set of behavior to another set of behavior, So I said on Twitter there recently, when someone asked me about that, I said it's not so much, the revolution, not so much a bloody riot as it is like a penguin shuffle. This is what the analogy that I used. And I think that's, this is kind of like, this is how any great social change has usually happened, is that a new opportunity for a different type of behavior appeared, and people just slowly migrated towards that type of behavior. And I think that's the best chance for moving towards this kind of society.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love that analogy of the penguin shuffling along, because it's going to be a much more harmonious transition going through that instead. Because for instance, the way COVID has happened, when all the financial systems collapsed, well, it appeared to collapse. Now, if the government hadn't got in place and kind of, offered the furlough scheme and all that things, then it really would have been a total collapse in many ways. But them stepping in, I've got many issues with our governments and stuff for sure. But we do need that shuffling approach. And if it takes, I think when I first watched all the Zeitgeist movies, I was like, oh, this is all going to change in the next decade. And it's like, no, like I might not even be here when it's finally transformed. It might be 100 years away, but I think it's quite good to think of it that way some ways, because at least we can be putting the things in place now for our children's generations, because they're the ones that are going to be left with this world. And I know when reading your stuff, I think when when you were younger and you were really disillusioned with the way you were treating the planet. And like, that's one big thing that's happened. You know, the amount of species that we've lost the past 50 years, what we're doing to the toxins in the environment and stuff. And it's like, we're just devastating it. And I'm about to become a father for the first time next month. And I'm thinking about that child and what world they're coming into. So I'm like, I want to do what I can do. And I know I spoke to Daniel Pinchback recently. He was on my podcast, and like, what he was talking about, like the things that we have to do to change the world. And for me, my focus is coming on, well, sometimes those big things can seem overwhelming when we've got our own things going on in life. It's like, what can we do each day to make a difference? And I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but I know a thing that you spoke about is like volunteering seems to be a big step in that direction. And and there's so many people doing it already that are just naturally giving up the time. Even though we live in this system, so many people are already stepping outside of that.
Yeah, and that's one of the more compelling arguments that I would make for this kind of society is the number of people who volunteer today, when it's absolutely fundamentally detrimental to do it, because you're losing a chance to earn money, and it's costing you money probably to do what you're doing, but the fact that people still do it anyway, it's like, wow, imagine if we didn't have that cost restriction, and that's great. And yeah, I think as regards the shift in behavior, I think it has happened. It has already started. I mean, when like I was saying, when in early 2000s, when the internet was really rising, we saw this massive advent of free content, of really high quality free content, and that hasn't stopped. That's still going. I know we kind of curtailed. We got rid of Napster or Metallica did, and we've curtailed a lot of that. And we're controlling it. I'll just talk about music, which is what I know about most, but obviously it applies to other things like journalism and video content and stuff as well. But the sort of cat is out of the bag there now. We know that basically people expect a certain amount of free stuff on the internet now, which was absolutely unheard of 20 or 30 years ago. So that's already a change. That's not going back. That's not going back in the box. I mean, we'll try and monetize it a bit more, blah, blah, blah. But eventually that's going to be, people expect to go onto YouTube now and find pretty much anything that they want to watch. Maybe they have to sit through an ad, but it's a small price to pay. But the point is that was absolutely unheard of 20 or 30 years ago, to be able to have that really high quality access to content. And then, of course, you have the open source movement as well, which is another really important thing that people like coders and developers are putting together software in their own spare time. And what you have is you have this massive numbers of people working on a single project, and that creates a really high quality product at the end. Like Linux or Ubuntu, these operating systems, you have maybe like a few 100,000 people who are kind of contributing code into that. That's really interesting as well. And that, of course, can be applied to other sectors as well, not just computing. There's actually a really good website called Open Source Ecology, actually, which is all about building your own farming and agricultural tools and methods. Of course, that's all free as well. So with this advent of free is not stopping, and it's going to continue as on the same trajectory, of course. And I'm here to help it along in any way I possibly can. One of the things actually you mentioned there about the COVID situation, how the government handled the thing. I think actually in general the governments have been quite responsible, really, in all that thing, and I'm kind of happy with the way that's been handled, really, from a media point of view. I know there's a lot of conspiracies against that, but I think it's in general it's good to err on the side of public safety. But one of the things that, I mean, you were talking about like how they're managing to prevent the economy stalling and prevent collapsing. Well, obviously they're just, somebody somewhere is just printing more and more money or whatever, say, okay, we need another couple of trillion here. Okay, no problem. We just make it, it literally comes out of thin air, okay, we'll invent this document here and then we'll sell this to this guy and we'll sell to that guy. And it's all just ridiculous magic show, really. There's no other way to put it. And one of the things that I'd like to to discuss there, or would like to mention there, is about other sort of there's other facets to our society which actually prove that our society doesn't work. But we kind of, it's like these big band-aids that we have to keep it all together. And one of them, of course, is debt. Debt is it's basically, it's a way of pushing money into society when that side of society is not working. You know, it's like giving like adrenaline to a drug addict or something like that. You know, they're strung out, whatever, they've nothing left. Okay, give them another shot, give them a shot, and we keep doing this, giving them more shot into the patient, and it's basically money from thin air. I'm sure you don't need me to spell that out to you. Most people know that money comes from commercial loans. You go into the bank asking for £100,000 loan, then they literally type that number into existence there, and then assuming you're approved. And this debt, this absolute mountain of debt that we carry in society, something in the order of 400 or 500 trillion now worldwide, is proof that capitalism isn't working. Because when you really think about it, I mean, if we base our society on trade, then why would we ever need to owe anything? Why would we need to owe something? You know, surely if I trade something with you, you trade something with them, and blah blah blah, and everyone makes money through that, then why would anyone ever need to borrow anything? You know, I mean, it's like the debt is covering up the fact that if you stripped all that debt away and everyone just traded with what they had and they could do, then it wouldn't work. It clearly wouldn't work. The other two things of society, obviously, charity is another thing. Charities exist to basically solve problems that capitalism can't solve, like homelessness and poverty, and rape victims and all that sort of stuff. These things are basically things which are discarded by capitalism, things that the market can't find a solution for. So charity is is kind of the clunky sort of solution, and say, okay, well, everyone just put money in this box and we'll try and solve the problem with whatever shillings you give us. And of course, the welfare system, dole payments, job seekers allowance, or whatever you call it, wherever you are, this welfare system, food stamps. Why would a functional capitalist society ever need to actually give people free money? Or we can talk about universal basic income, even. You can lump that into the same thing there. Why would that ever be necessary if trade really worked? So it's like the system always finds a way, ingenious ways of perpetuating itself, whereas in charity or in debt and other stuff. And that's something that could technically go on and on forever. We can just keep going with it. We can put universal basic income in, and we can keep monetizing the technology, et cetera, et cetera. But at some stage, we have to realize, well, actually, this machine thing isn't working, and it's creating all kinds of aberrations. Let's not even get into the whole mental illness and all that sort of stuff, that people are suffering from stress and depression and all that sort of stuff because they're outcast from the system, or they feel like they're not good enough and they're not a proper functioning person. So I think that's I don't know. I just think that to get to the money-free society requires a behavioral change, intentional behavioral change. I don't think it's going to happen automatically. I don't think technology is going to bring it. I think it needs to come from us, from normal, regular people. I'm going to put a word as middle-class people, I think, are the key to bringing about that kind of money-free society. Because, like it or not, middle-class people are the ones who rule the world. They are the ones who are oiling and greasing the machine all the time. We're the ones who had the expensive habits, the expensive purchasing habits, and so we're the ones keeping things going. It's not the bankers, it's not the CEOs, that sort of stuff. All they're doing is just servicing what we want. And the poor people who are living in the third world, they basically don't have a vote. They don't have any sort of clout or power on the world stage. So really, that's why I think it falls down to middle class people to to actualize this kind of society by starting to think differently.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And just on that thing about the middle classes, with what we've gone through with COVID, because basically the world stopped for a few months, in that time, all them people, for the majority, would have really focused more on what are the essentials, what's the important things in our lives. It's not the new iPhone, it's not getting the new car, it's not going on holiday, because all them things were pretty much pulled away for them. And what we've known on our street, you could lump me in that middle class society, in that section, that group, is that all our neighbours have become more connected, and we're spending more time together, and we're sharing more information. And
Great.
and from that, that's the thing, that's the key, that's what's gonna, rather than us just be sat at home. I think when TVs got invented, wasn't it, before TVs were invented, everyone was in and out everyone's home, no one used to lock the front door. That's what my grandma would talk about. Everyone would just be in and out everyone's house. As soon as the TVs get put in, or you'd walk down the street and there'd just be a little glow in everyone's house and everyone's indoors. And that's where everyone's getting their information from. And I think since that point, and then again, like you said, with technology, and yeah, it appears that we're more connected, but actually it's done the opposite. And I just want to come back to the money thing, because it's such a big thing. I speak to people about it all the time, as much as I can. Like we're literally enslaved through this system, completely enslaved. And when ask anyone, and it happened with COVID, most people would have first thought about, they would have thinking about, where am I going to get my food from and where am I going to get my money from? They were the two things, because it's like the very basic needs. Now, obviously, we're always going to need food. I'm always going to need shelter. But if there's a different system in place that negates them worries, and you mentioned earlier on about living in community more, and that's something that I'm really become really fascinated by, and seeing how people do it. Like there's a few, I don't know if you've heard of them. There's one in Wales called the Lammas community. Now, the Welsh government were very forward thinking in a way. They allowed a certain group of people to buy agricultural land, so at that agricultural price. So they would be able to buy something like 12 acres for something like £20,000, which is significantly less than, what would you pay if that was to build a property on. And part of the remit for them was to make sure that they can develop an income from their land. So I think some of the families, they've invested £25,000 in this, and their land is making them an income through growing food. Some of them weave, some of them have Airbnbs on there, just a way of generating their income without them thinking they've got a 30-year mortgage. They're locked in. A lot of the choices in life seem to go away. So what you're talking about, it can definitely be a wake-up call for certain people. And I think COVID's been that wake-up call for a lot of people. But I think on the back of it, what you're talking about can build even more momentum about moving to a society where there is less stress. Like we don't need to be in such struggle. And when you realize it as well, the material possessions do not bring happiness, do not bring contentmentness, do not make you feel fulfilled. The thing that makes me feel fulfilled is, for instance, I do this podcast. I'm recording this with you. It doesn't cost me anything to record it. It doesn't cost me anything to put it out. It's just my time that's needed to go into it. So the more things like that, like I get more fulfillment out of this than actually, you might get a buzz from buying something new, but like anything, it doesn't last. And then you're always chasing after the next thing. So like you said, it's the middle classes. We've got the power to make the shift ourselves by becoming more aware of our choices and our actions, rather than thinking it's up to the government to change it, or it's up to the corporations. It's actually, no, it's us and our actions that change.
Absolutely, yeah. We're the ones in control, really. I mean, we often don't feel like it, or we don't think of. But I mean, if we all withdrew our purchasing overnight, then they would be hell to pay. There would be absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the COVID thing really has been an amazing experiment, for want of a better word. I mean, it showed completely naked what actually we need. We don't fucking need this thing that we're supposed to think we need, but actually we need food. Oh my God, we need food. We need, all this really basic stuff. And I love the way COVID really reduced society down to that basic need. And of course, on the other side of the coin, it also showed who are the really important workers. That's the real thing that I think was amazing. You know, suddenly you saw in plain daylight, oh, those are all the bullshit jobs. These are all the people who are sitting at home, and these people are out working their asses off. These are the people actually that are in the important jobs. And when you start to actually see it in that stark contrast, you know, the people who are working and the people who are not working. And you also start to notice, well, actually, the people who are still working, these are the ones who are getting shit pay. And the ones who are sitting at home relaxing after the bullshit job are getting the huge pay. And you start to think, well, there's something seriously wrong with that, you know? It's like, it's almost like our pay scale is completely wrong way around. You know, the people whose jobs we need the most get paid the least, and the people whose job we need the least get paid the most. It really is that bizarrely upside down, you know. And I love the way COVID has really kind of presented that fact to people so obviously. So, but can it be utilized as a stepping point? Yeah, I think so. I think it's good for people to have had that little bit of a wake-up call to see what's important and what isn't, because we have really been fooled, I suppose, as to what we think is important, which isn't important. And of course, you talk about the middle classes being enslaved. Well, in some ways, we're absolutely bombarded with messages about the things that we need to purchase every day. You know, I mean, and you can't deny the impact of that. You know, people often say, it's just an advert, it's just a billboard, it doesn't matter. But these things have impact, because companies wouldn't pay millions and millions of pounds to put them there if they didn't work. So, you mean, we are being influenced all the time with advertising and marketing. I mean, that goes without saying. And so the fact that COVID came along then and said, okay, all this marketing thing was bullshit, actually, we have to think about food and that sort of stuff. So I love the fact that happened. I would like to see that it could actually, one of the problems with COVID is that it has kind of reduced our ability to commune with each other, you know, to actually go out and meet people and that sort of stuff. That's been a bit of a pain. And I would have liked to have seen that maybe the people could actually get together and do more sharing and cooperation during that time. But of course, it's not very safe to do that. So that's been a bit of a shame inside of it. But at least I think it's been a good flashpoint for people to realize what's important and what isn't. During the COVID thing, we set up, myself and a couple of other people, we set up a website called ShareBay. And this is basically, it's a kind of a prototype for the sort of thing I'm talking about, where people can share and cooperate, volunteer goods and services between other people globally. So this is sharebay.org if you want to check it out. It's basically, it's like we're only starting out. It's like we're kind of trying to define it as like a library of goods and services where everyone offers something for free. And because you offer something for free, then you obviously can avail of free things there from the thing. So it's like a kind of a miniature free economy, if you like. So that's going really well. And I'm hoping that on the back of the COVID thing, we can actually sort of advance that out to other places. In UK, I know there's quite a few other interesting initiatives like that. You might know helpfulpeeps.com. And there's another one called Olio, which is based in London, which they have an app, like a food sharing app. So there's lots of these little things coming out around. I mean, ShareBay is one, but there are lots of them. There's nextdoor.com, I think is another one, might be in the UK, I'm not sure. So I think there's an invitation to communities to start getting involved in these kind of websites, tool libraries, repair cafes, this sort of stuff. These are really, really great ideas, I think, because they're people offering things for other people. There's no reward expected. It's basically just people helping because people like to help. And that's, of course, one of the things that we're being lied about, is that we don't do anything. No such thing as a free lunch. You don't get something for nothing. These are absolute lies. Of course you get something for nothing. We do it all the time, you know. And of course there is such a thing as a free lunch. You know, I mean, we're so bombarded with this kind of distorted sort of worldview, and it's with the backdrop of consumer marketing and all that sort of stuff. So we kind of lost the ability to see what's important and what isn't, and what kind of things we like. As you mentioned yourself, I mean, you do the podcasts. It takes you a certain amount of time. You do it because you like it and you enjoy it. I do what I do because I like it and I enjoy it too. I often people often complain to me because I won't take payment for things, but sometimes I do because I have to take payment for some things. But in general, yeah, I mean, we're all pretty much the same. We all love to get out there and do things, and we do like to have the admiration and respect of other people. And one of the ways to get respect and admiration from people is to help people, and that's good. That's something that we need. We need to have that. We need to feel valued, and we've kind of, we've misappropriated that sort of value system in money. We said, well, your value is now this amount of money that you have in your bank account. That's your value. And if you have no money, then this is your value. You're a valueless person. And that's just complete bullshit, and we need to move away from that because it's too damaging. It's just absolutely too damaging. And I mean, I know loads of people. I'm sure you know plenty of people who are, maybe they're out of work. They can't work. They have some issues, mental issues, or something like that, or they're I don't know. They're just they're like dropped out or outcast from society a little bit because they're not ABC or whatever, and that's an awful shame, And these are people, really, really bright and amazing people that I know, who are marginalized by the system, this distorted system of value. So I think we need to move back towards communities. You mentioned television. Sorry to keep going on, but you mentioned television as well, and that is exactly another layer of technology, one of the early layers of technology that was kind of removing people from each other, separating people from each other. And I remember, like, growing up in the 70s, there's more and more people were having TVs, and people were starting to become concerned with TVs, and saying, well, they called it the goggle box or whatever, that basically that people were missing out on that neighborly connection. Now, I'm old enough to remember sort of in the early 70s how strong our own little community was, and how people basically did look out for each other. You knew your neighbors knew you. They often dropped in. Sometimes they'd even just walk in the doors would be open, and you knew the people across the street. And if you needed something, I mean, the proverbial cup of sugar, this is the world I grew up in. I grew up in there's no such thing as that now, So I think we need to get back to that. I really do think we need to get back to that, because that physical human connection is vital for our well-being.
Yeah, loads of great points. It feels like, for me, for the transition is, like, for instance, I have bills to pay. I've got, for me to transition, it's almost like having a foot in each camp. It's like each week I'm going to volunteer my time, because I can. And also the great thing about volunteering as well, you've got so much more choice, because if you're seeking after a job, there's not all the jobs in the world. You might not, you might want to work in the food industry, but actually there's nothing there. But you can make stuff and volunteer and cook stuff and give it away, or other thing. But there might not be that, that thing. So I remember speaking to, I think it was to someone else as well about that. It's like, and also you don't have to. There's no pressure as well. It's not like you have to prove yourself when you're volunteering. Yeah. It's like you can just do it. No one's judging you. No one's going to sack you. No one's going to, give you a whatever. It's like, so it feels like to me, like what I'm doing here, I'm almost volunteering my time, but I do some other stuff as well. But I realized that I need to have a foot in, because I'd love to just volunteer all the time, but at the moment it's quite not, well, that isn't the world that I live in at the moment.
Of course.
But I can transition to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm very, very aware of that as well. I mean, I've been somebody who has maybe more so than most have been affected by that, in the realization that, well, actually, I'm going too far this way, and I need to step back a little bit because I'm in danger of becoming outcast myself, and becoming powerless, I suppose, to make some kind of change, and also to have a good quality of life myself. And that's really important. And I would stress to anyone who's kind of thinking along this kind of this path is not to forget that you do still have to have bills to pay. You do have to put food on the table. You're probably not going to grow it yourself. And you need to keep, at least 1.5 feet anyway in the real world, because if you let yourself slip, then you're just going to drop out of the system, and it's not really going to help you. So what I really advocate most strongly to people is to share and volunteer what they can without going overboard. That's why we set up the ShareBay site. You'll see lots of people are offering goods and services there, but they're all kind of small value goods and services. No one's offering a sports car, or no one's giving away their house yet. Although some people have been offered free leases on land and stuff like that, which is interesting. But we're seeing that people are just giving away small bits and pieces. And my thinking is that if enough of us do that, if enough of us give away these just small little bits and pieces to each other, we can build confidence in that idea, and we can say, okay, well, maybe I have confidence now to actually give something a bit of a higher value, because I know that I can get something higher value back. So it can kind of go up like a ladder, and as more people use it, then it can eventually take down the whole capitalist structure. I mean, that's my theory anyway, that if we build up to so many people and so many transactions, and it can create a whole new set of behavior in the same way as the internet did, or the telephone did, or whatever. If we're creating basically a tool to allow people to share goods and services with strangers, basically. So that's the difference. I mean, obviously we all do it with our friends and family and our neighbors when we can, but the idea of ShareBay is that it facilitates that kind of stuff between strangers, and that's what we need to do. And because it's kind of like a closed community or a walled community, you could kind of imagine like that. So you kind of know that everyone else is in that space is doing the same as you. So it's not like someone's just going to come and take all the time. So it's kind of like a safe space for people to go and share their goods and services there. So I would definitely encourage people to check that out anyway, if they're interested in that train of thought. For me, I just, as someone who's kind of really been thinking long and hard about this for maybe 10 years, this is most probably the realistic approach to getting towards a money-free world, because capitalism, everyone complains about capitalism. But what is capitalism? It's basically trading. It's trading between you and me. You give me some item and I give you something of equal subjective value, and that's capitalism. So it's an exclusive exchange between two people. Multiply that out by millions of billions of people, that's your system. But if we start introducing a new type of behavior, say, okay, well, you give me something and I give you nothing back, but I give something to someone else and they give something to someone else. I call it like an implicit trade system, where it's kind of like, it's not explicit, is where you give exchange between one person. The implicit is where it's like a circular trading system, where I give to you, but because I know you will probably give to someone else, because you know they will probably give to someone else. So it's a system based on trust. And of course, trust is the opposite of money, because this is why we use money, because it's a substitute for trust. And so we have to learn to do that trusting part again.
I'll be definitely sure to check out this site, and I'll share it as well openly. One thing, just thinking about money and stuff as well, is because one of the major issues seems to be at the moment is, like we spoke before, it's printed out of thin air, but so few people control so much. It's not a decentralized system. It's all centralized. It comes from the central banks. We're living in a system called fiat currency. It's not backed by anything. It used to be backed by gold in the 70s, and it's been almost 50 years now, I think, since that's gone. And I think the last time something like that happened, or it's gone that long, was it in Roman Empire, once they started to cut up their gold, and I think it lasted about 40, 50 years. So it seems like we're ripe for quite a change at some point. And I got a bit excited about it a few years ago. I'm not as excited as I was, but the idea of what the impact cryptocurrency can potentially have on community. I know it's not living in a shared free system, but the idea of it being decentralized and potentially enable people in certain parts of the world who don't have bank accounts, don't have ways to, don't have an ID or a passport or anything to set something up, but they're able to connect and share goods and services through that way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have been excited about crypto as well. I mean, I like to see crypto. I think it's definitely a positive step. I think it's anything that sort of decentralizes our society is always a good idea. We need to start thinking about like a horizontal society instead of a vertical society. But I think that the problem with crypto and the reason that I think it hasn't taken off. I mean, you can't go down the local shop and buy a coffee with Bitcoin, or almost no place can you do that. And I think what gives fiat currency its value, obviously, is the fact that it's backed by government, or the government, it's legal tender. And what that really means, I suppose, is that everyone agrees, everyone in that society agrees that is a de facto currency. And that's the only thing really that gives it value, is that all our shared belief in that currency, that your pound, I know that your pound is the same as my pound, and that is what gives us its value, is that we all agree on that system. And obviously the problem with crypto is that you haven't just got Bitcoin, you've got like thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of other ones out there, So how do you create a de facto cryptocurrency when there's millions of them, because maybe I have Litecoin and you've got the Faircoin or whatever, and there's just millions of them everywhere. So I don't know. I don't see a big future for crypto somehow. I like the idea of it. I like to think that maybe the idea of really paying someone with a bunch of computer numbers will kind of highlight the sort of futility of that anyway. Because one of the things with money, of course, is, I mean, we still have this kind of subconscious idea of hard cash, coins and notes in your hand, and that physical substance lends weight to your belief in it, because it has physical value. And I think that's probably really one thing that's really in money's favor, is the fact it does have a physical presence. You'll probably notice that a lot of countries now are talking about going cashless. And that's kind of another interesting prospect. I think a lot of people are afraid of countries going cashless. I kind of would be too, because it means that you can't hide money in your mattress anymore. It means that you don't have control of any of your money. So you could have like £1 million in your bank account, but somebody can just switch you off, and now you have nothing. So you have that, you're completely vulnerable there. So, but I think that the cashless society, again, it might have the same effect that I think crypto could have, that would kind of eventually bring it home to people, the true valuelessness of money, that actually it's nothing really. I mean, a Bitcoin is just a fucking number, and a cashless society, again, or it's just going to be a bank account with a number in a bank account. And I don't know, I would be cautiously optimistic that maybe those things kind of help people to view money for what it is, which is really just a shared belief. And of course, we can change that belief at any moment, any moment.
That's good to get your insight on the cryptocurrencies and stuff. One thing that popped in my mind then is, so if we were in a cashless society, how, like for instance, how a home, a set of homes going to be built. So, and if someone says, well, actually, I want a 5-bedroom home, but I only want a 2-bedroom home, where does, if there's not someone saying, well, I've got 500,000 to pay for the 5-bedroom one, and I've got 200,000 to pay for the two-bedroom one. I'm interested to get your thoughts on how that would be, worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that I wrote in the book, the F-Day book, was it was like a fictional novel that depicted a country, Iceland, who was adopting this money-free system. And one of the chapters in the book is kind of devoted to doing a tour of Iceland operating this way, and how that actually worked. Of course, it's a work of fiction, so I'm kind of speculating. But how I sort of envisioned that kind of thing was, for example, in one of the chapters, they were building like a road bridge. They had to build this big civic structure. Okay, and so this was my way of dealing with it. So how do you deal with big, expensive, complex projects like that? And this could apply to housing or to hospitals or schools or anything like that. And what I proposed in that system was that you would obviously, you have to first appreciate that everyone is not working, so people have free time. So what you would do is you would basically try and recruit a certain amount of volunteers, the amount of volunteers that you would need. And then basically what you would do is you would get all these volunteers who were presumably enthusiastic about it to take some kind of a public pledge to say that they would contribute to this project to its completion. And we would have like a kind of even a public ceremony about that to say, okay, we have 100 people here. Okay, we need you to give us a pledge that you're going to work on this project for the next 5-6 months to completion. And of course, if they run away from the project after a couple of weeks, there's nothing you could do about that. But the point is that there's kind of like it's kind of like a shaming thing that it's kind of like they would lose some kind of stature for doing that. So, which I think is not a bad thing, because I think if you agree to do something at the outset, then and you're obviously, and assuming everything is in good faith, you should be able to see it through to completion. So that's one way I was proposing, that basically for large complex projects that people would take a public pledge towards actually seeing through that project. And of course, they would all their needs would be catered for during that by other people, because not just the people who are building your houses, it's the ancillary services, people who are making the supplies for the builder, the people who are making the food for the builder, the people who are, supplying the lorries, blah, blah, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's just my proposal, that basically you would have a sort of a pledge system where people would actually pledge on projects like that. But the other thing is that one of the drawbacks, I think, of modern society is that we probably rely on other people too much. Basically, if we pay to somebody to solve a problem for us, that's great, but it doesn't kind of teach us to solve the problem for ourselves. So that's a little bit of a controversial, a thorny point maybe for some people. But for example, if you want to build a house, if you want to build a 5-bedroom house, maybe, I don't know what your sort of skill set is or what it might be, but I could probably upskill myself and work towards maybe achieving that myself with my own skills, and maybe employing other people to help me do it. So I think that upskilling is something that we should be thinking about as well. I think we've become a little bit too helpless because of the money, because we just pay to solve a problem without ever learning to solve a problem ourselves. And we learn this kind of helplessness. And I think that we're much more powerful and smarter than we like to think, So I think that, if you take away those other incentives, maybe it will force us to actually think through problems ourselves. Okay, like if I want a 10-bedroom house, okay, maybe no one's going to fucking help me build a 10-bedroom house. So maybe I'm going to have to build it myself. And say, okay, well, how am I going to do that? Okay, well, maybe I can't do that or whatever. So I don't know, you made this a process of self-organization, I suppose, where society wouldn't be like it would be now, but it will organize in a different way. The important thing is that if it's more connected and if it's more fair, then it can actually hopefully organize itself in a better way than today.
Yeah, interesting. I like that idea of what you commit to stuff, and like you say, there's something very much going to the point about upskilling our own stuff. There's nothing like during lockdown. I've shared this a few times, so if anyone's heard this a few times on the podcast, please excuse me, but I built a chicken coop and I just made it from recycled pallets. And I asked people, I put it out on Facebook, says, anyone got any materials? I'm building this. And someone turned up the day later and had this corrugated steel for the roof. And basically it cost me £3 to make this big chicken coop. And I probably put about 60 hours into it. And I loved every single hour of that. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I just looked at some images online and I just made it up as I went along. And like that, I could have went out and paid £300 for one, which actually I don't think it would have looked as good actually in the end. But that would have been a simple transaction, pay for it, someone else has done it. But actually doing something yourself, there's something really empowering about it. And one thing on that, I think one of the key things is in changing this society, it's got to be the way we educate kids. Like at the moment, we're educating kids to go out and to be in the workforce. And what does that workforce even look like in 10, 20, 30 years with automation coming in, driverless cars? You know, what's like my mum and dad's, particularly my mum, she worked in one industry for about 40 odd years or more. That's kind of gone now. You know, so it'd be interesting to get your insight on that with the education system.
Yeah, well, it's obviously something that's been heavily on my mind as well. In fact, a few years ago, we released an educational app called Life Games, which coincidentally enough is kind of exactly what you're talking about. It's a excuse me. It's basically an app of kids' games, like so that we can be played in the classroom or a group. And they basically teach cooperation, they teach empathy and compassion and sharing and all these kind of values that I think are lost and that I think are important. Yeah, I mean, education has been like a real bugbear of mine because, as you say, I think that we're driven into learning languages and mathematics and history and geography, which, while they are important, they are nowhere near as important as things like relationships, understanding yourself and understanding your negative emotions and learning how to communicate with other people and and it's just really learning how to cooperate and work together with other people. Those things are, I mean, they're invaluable life skills and would be much more useful to any child now than algebra or anything like that. Not to say that those things are useless, but that the priority seems to be completely backwards again, that we're really driving this sort of heavy academic sort of challenge to people, when actually the real success of life and the success of anyone is almost never academic. It's almost always how you communicate with other people, how you present yourself, how you feel about yourself, how you feel about other people, how you cooperate with other people. I mean, these things are the any successful person will tell you that it's really how you actually communicate and how you are effective with other people is what makes success. And academic is really almost negligible. So I mean, I'm still surprised that we still have that education system. I think it's getting better from what I hear from people, that the classrooms and teachers are becoming a little bit more liberal in their thinking and more eco-aware, certainly, and also more empathy aware and sort of community aware, I suppose. And I'd like to see that happening more and more. We released this app and a set of books about 2 years ago now. Unfortunately, we weren't in a position to continue promoting it because it was a commercial project, and we basically ran out of funds. So what we did was eventually we just made the app free. So the app is free there now if anyone was interested. So you have about 200 or 300 games for kids basically that teach these kind of values. So it's called Life Games if anyone's interested in checking that out. But yeah, education, yeah, absolutely. And of course, if we start gravitating towards the different kind of society that you and I think is possible, then obviously education will have to catch up. And because that's going to be really crucial, and how we define our success is based on how we are educated. And we need to redefine what success is, and what failure is and what failure isn't. One of the things that I mean, for example, I really failed quite badly at school. Well, not badly, but I was below average student, shall we say. And that kind of left a sort of a mark on me for that. It took quite a long time for me to shift, I have to say. I mean, I spent maybe first 20 years of my adulthood kind of with this backdrop of failure, because I hadn't really excelled in academia. And it took me quite a while to actually shift that. And that's a tough thing to shift, because I had been graded by a system that was, I eventually realized was just not fair, or was just not relating to how best I could perform to actually be successful and be happy. So that's the thing and I'm quite sure millions of people out there are in the same situation, that they've school has let them down, or maybe they excelled really well in school. They were a fantastic student, but they got nowhere in life afterwards, and they felt kind of cheated by that as well. So I'm sure that those kind of people exist as well. So education. I would love to see radical overhaul education. Yeah. I love the homeschooling. A lot of people who are homeschooling, I love the way those people are turned out, because I know quite a few of these guys who've been homeschooled, and like they think on a completely different level. They really are. They're very fresh and not indoctrinated, I suppose. So the homeschooling is great. More maybe group schooling. I think maybe homeschooling one child maybe on its own is probably not a great idea. If you can get groups of other parents or whatever doing the same thing, I think it would be the optimal way to do it. But I mean, that's the way it's been for whatever thousands of years before schools came along 150 years ago, which I think, as you intimated there at the start, they were really they were sort of factories to create workers, basically, schools. And this is what happened when the advent of the Industrial Revolution. Then we had all these industrial schools basically springing up around that, and this was the basis of modern society. That you had red brick schools with little kids going in with uniforms and all learning their ABCs and their 1, 2, 3s, and really learning to comply. Really, I suppose, in a lot of ways. So I still think a lot of that system is still existing today, and I think we need to really overhaul that. We really have to rethink that.
Yeah, well, thankfully, I feel like obviously we're speaking, and there's many other people who are along this train of thought, and you touched on it as well. Like a lot of teachers are sort of switching on now to the level of tests and grading, and putting kids in these boxes and putting them under so much pressure. Like kids when they're 7 or 8 doing homework and tests and graduations and stuff, it's bonkers.
Yeah.
And it actually, I remember I've got a side project I've been working on, and it talks about education and kids and stuff. And it's basically all kids are born geniuses. It's something like there was this thing like a study was done to like 99% of 3-year-olds are classed as creative geniuses. By the time they get to 7, only 33% are. And when you get in your 30s and 40s, only 1% are. So it's the system. The system appears to be trying to turn people into geniuses, but actually it's doing the opposite. We're already like that. We've, as you said, we've already got them creative endeavors. Everyone's got a different approach. So if some people learn fast, some people learn slow. That doesn't mean they're any different, but the system says you have to learn this in this amount of time, and then you have to sit down and do this test within 2 hours, and you'll get graded 8 or whatever. And like you say, it took you 20 years to shake off some of that influence on you. And it's and I think us talking about it and some of the shifts, and I think, is it Ken Robinson, who's a teacher who's done one of the most amazing TED Talks, he talks about how important creativity is, and unfortunately it's just been eroded bit by bit, and it's getting taken over. It's still in schools, but there's less sort of weight put towards it.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm very interested in homeschooling, and obviously with COVID, a lot of parents have been forced into that. Now, I'm sure a lot of them couldn't wait to get out of it as well, because it was a lot of them, it wasn't a transition to it. It was like, right, I've got to work full time at my desk and I've got to teach the kids. So maybe that's not the best introduction to it, but I do think, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's not for everyone, not for every parent, of course. Yeah, but I think that there is, I think there is a responsibility for parents that maybe a lot of parents don't really face up to. That you bring a child into this world, well, that's great, but a lot of them, they really export their child to paid care services all the time, and I don't know. Yeah, it's a bit of a controversial point, but I think that yeah, if you're going to be a parent, then be a parent and stop exporting the problem just because it's making a bit too much noise or messing up the place. I don't know. I'm not a parent myself, so I can't really speak professionally, but I think that yeah, it's homeschooling is. It doesn't have to be like 9 to 5 schooling or something like that. It can just really be just a good grounding in life, really. And I think that's and the basic facts, the important facts about the world. I think that's really important. Of course, you need to know something about the world you live in, but I think most importantly, you need to know about how to get on with other people. And probably, if there's the thing I learned most and the best in school was probably my social life, the people that I knew, the friends that I had in school, and the things that worked and didn't work with those guys, the fights or the not, or the makeups and all that sort of stuff, and those to me were the most valuable lessons in school, rather than the academic stuff. So certainly, yeah, the social thing is really important. So that's why, yeah, homeschooling, I think for 1 or maybe 2 kids is probably not a good idea. It's better to have little small groups, maybe 5, 6, or 7 or more, that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, absolutely, yeah, it's something you might be considering yourself maybe in a few years' time.
Yeah, it is. It's something with what we've talked about and realizing what the system is in place. Do I really want to put my child through that? Now, I've got friends who homeschool, and it's a great environment. They create one afternoon, they spend a week with the grandparents and they cook all that afternoon. Like the grandma's passing on that knowledge of how to bake and make food. They
Fantastic.
they go to forestry school one day a week and they're with like 20 other homeschool kids. And throughout the rest of the week, the mum that I know, she's an ex-teacher. So she has about 5 homeschool kids come to her. And so
Yeah.
it's done in that way that you're talking about, not just in, I think some people think, oh, homeschool kid, it's just them on their own, stuck with the parents, but it doesn't have to be like that. And it's actually surprising how many people do it. Like where we are, there's literally in the boroughs close by, there's thousands of kids which are homeschooled. And
Wow, that's great.
you wouldn't actually think, you'd think if you just plugged into the mainstream, you'd think it was just this, it was right on the peripheral and not many people are doing it. But I think there's that many people who are questioning the way the world is going. And actually then realizing, like you touched on, why some people go to work to just pay for someone else to look after the kid. And maybe sometimes that's because they're focused on the career, and that's okay. But I think sometimes it's absolving their own responsibility, and
I think so.
taking on that ownership.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing is Steiner schools is a really good program that is quite popular in Europe anyway. And you know some people who are the kids went to Steiner schools. I know one story. A friend of mine, he had maybe a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old boy or something like that, and they were in a Steiner school, and they were people were shocked because they were cooking and they were using knives. They were using sharp knives to cut food at 6 years old, and this would be like a shock horror in normal schools. But I mean, of course, kids should be able to learn how to use sharp knives at an early age. I mean, of course, why not? It's another thing that possibly has nothing to do with the money-free society, but the ideas of sort of really wrapping our kids way too much in cotton wool as well nowadays, I think is something that is an awful shame. I think, really, I mean, there's no such thing as kids running around out the road playing on their own anymore. There's always a parent in tow following on behind and looking over their shoulder for pedophiles and all this kind of ridiculous carry on. There's such a fear of that your child is going to be abducted. It's sort of people doing this everywhere. And this is completely irrational fear. It's not like that at all. And I don't know. So of course, yeah, no one wants their kid to be the one that's abducted. I understand that, but I think that media-driven fear has impacted a lot on society as well. That people don't feel safer going out, but the actual fear is, I mean, statistically, the chances of that happening are absolutely negligible, probably. And yet, where everyone is just completely fearful that the worst is always going to happen. And you've only got to look at the headlines and all the newspapers, the tabloids and stuff to see the kind of messages people are getting, you know. So that's a shame as well. It's nothing really to do with the sort of stuff that I promote, but I would like to see kids going out and cutting their knee and getting dirty and climbing trees when I like to think that I did, but that seems to be the exception now rather than the norm, you know.
Yeah.
Kids are kind of they're really they're either indoors all the time playing games, or they're in school or in care or in sports or in some other organized program of some kind, but not just hanging out and being kids. There's very little of that going on, you know. Well, mind you, I'm not the perfect role model. I was probably hanging around smoking when I was 11 and 12, so that's probably not the ideal role model either. But yeah, I mean, I went out and I got my knees dirty and cut my elbows and all that sort of stuff, and fell off my bike several times. So how many kids can say that nowadays?
I know. It's true. And you use the word fear quite a bit. And I love that thing that people say, like, fear is basically false event appearing real. And
wow, that's good. I didn't hear that. That's nice.
And then when you think about it, like, you know, that's when you've got to think about, is it rational what I'm thinking about? Is that just my own insecurities and my own fears? Because let's be honest, 99.99% of things you worry about never happen. But
no.
Unfortunately, they end up dictating our lives and driving the direction that we go in and preventing us from really living a fulfilled life at times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of it is to do with this sort of tabloid newspaper thing, which obviously, if they tap into that fear, they know that basically if they can tap into that fear, then they can sell a paper, you know. So they put a big headline of, you know, someone is a beast. They usually always use this word beast, I've noticed, actually. So they kind of, they shock people into some sort of emotive reaction. Then they can get their quid off you or whatever. And you buy the paper and you go home and read that, and you think the world is an awful place, you know. And I mean, we shouldn't pretend ever that we're just unaffected by the stuff that we see on the TV, the stuff that we read. You know, there's kind of there's this kind of false sort of blasé attitude about that. You know, people say, it's just a movie, it's just a video game, it's just a stupid book, it's just a stupid newspaper. But the reality is we are affected by those things. We are indirectly and strongly affected by the information that we consume. There's absolutely no doubt about that. You know, as somebody once pointed out, I think it was a great meme on Facebook about what was something along the lines of if people say, like, video games don't create violence, you know, and yet they kind of say, well, but companies will spend millions of dollars putting an advert for beer in the Super Bowl. And why do they do that? Because they know that it's going to work. They know that when they invest, why else would a company invest millions to put an ad in Super Bowl? Because they know it's going to work. They know it's going to affect people. It is going to change their mind. And then how can you say that violent movies and violent video games aren't making people more violent? I mean, it's completely facetious to say that one thing is true and the other isn't true. You know, of course, violent movies and video games are normalizing that kind of behavior. I've no doubt whatsoever in my mind that there would be no shoot-ups in American schools had there been no violent movies accessible to kids and violent video games. I mean, this is absolutely where it comes from. You know, there's no other explanation for it. You know, I mean, a kid gets pissed off and he goes and grabs his father's gun and goes and shoots the teacher. I mean, you don't invent that stuff yourself. You know, I mean, you learn that from somewhere. It's normalized somewhere. You know, and when you see it, so many of the movies nowadays are it's just absolutely normalized violence, like it's completely irrelevant. You know. Like the guy goes and shoots 5 or 6. I was watching a movie the other day with Mark Wahlberg or something like that, this actor, and I think in the first like 30 seconds, I think he had shot about 10 people. I mean, literally in the beginning of the movie, just bang, 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 and all this sort of stuff. And I was thinking, you know, it just looks like a game. It looks like a video game and that sort of stuff. But you can't deny that it's normalizing a type of behavior, and that can certainly create that kind of behavior in other people, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I know.
Yeah.
It's, for instance, if you watch a comedy, and you have a really good laugh, you can see the effect that has on you during it, and then after it, you feel
Yeah.
lighter. You wake up
Yeah.
with a bit of a spring in your step. It's like you've had a release. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the polar opposite if you're, like hiding behind the sofa watching something, or even because it doesn't take you long. It only takes you a few minutes to almost be locked into something. And then you're tuned into it. And you know what it's like? If you're in a cinema and someone jumps out and gets shot, you jump as well. So there's literally a physical effect on you and your being. So yeah, it's really, it's interesting when you go under it. And like you say, a lot of people just dismiss it and think, oh, it's fine, But I know my cousin, she watched The Shining, I think, when she was in the teenage years. She was in about 13, 14, and she's still terrified to this day, like 25 years on. It's had such an impact on her that's made her feel fearful of the dark and all sorts of stuff. But
sure. And whatever age she was when she watched that, if you imagine how many other kids are watching similar movies where there was like a particularly violent content or something like that, or where they shoot the parents, or where there's something really shocking and violent happens. I mean, you have to say that a certain percentage of those kids will seek, if they don't act, they might even think of repeating that behavior. They might say, well, this is something I would like to do, and it's okay for me to do that, it's not okay, of course. So yeah, mixed sort of moral messages out there for profit, basically.
Well, hopefully with the stuff that you're talking about and the systems we're going to go to, then it's going to do away with a lot of this stuff. And I think when you talk about advertising stuff, I think it reminds me of a few cities. I think it might be Cuba or certain places. Like there was no advertising for so many years, and they did studies on the people, and it showed how much happier they were, and also how much more comfortable they were in their own skin. Like if you pick up a magazine, you're just seeing beautiful people, but the reality is that isn't what 90% of people look like. Yet we're given this aspiration, and then when you've got Facebook and Twitter, and people can put all these different filters on stuff to make themselves not even look like they are anymore. And you wonder where that comes from. Well, it comes from advertising. It comes from the subliminal messages that we've been bombarded for every single day of our lives, and our parents have, and that's why hopefully we can shift to a new way. But yeah, it's
not, again, it's like normalization, whereas one thing would normalize violence, something normalizes a certain level of beauty. And it's completely bonkers, as you would say. I remember reading one story of some girl in Los Angeles who went to a plastic surgeon asking him to make her look more like her Instagram filter, which I thought was kind of bizarre.
Oh God.
So kind of gone a bit crazy there, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think once you become aware of these things now, like we're talking about it, and more people are, as soon as you become conscious of it, like you can start to change the habits, and you can go in a different path, and you can see it from what it is, and you can let it go. And I kind of want to bring this back a little bit to what's going on, what you're talking about and stuff, and maybe just touch on your books before we kind of wrap up. And I know you mentioned F Day, the second dawn of the man is now. And I understand that you're writing am I right? You're writing a movie script for that at the moment?
Yeah, actually, there's a guy a movie producer in Reno, has expressed an interest in co-writing we're co-writing the screenplay now. We've just finished like the first 30 pages or something like that. It'll probably be something like 200 pages. And it's a really exciting project because number one, I think that it's a really good timely project because we have all this stuff going on now with the Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg and all this kind of like urgency going on in terms of with the environment and of course with the social change, and COVID of course has helped us a little bit as well. So there's a kind of a cocktail of things happening there, which kind of means that this could be a good appetite for this kind of story out there in a movie format. And the guy who I'm working with, he has lots of really good contacts over in LA, and he has also said that he knows, and he knows kind of for a fact that a lot of sort of people working in that business now, they are also starting to see things differently. They want to start seeing changes and different sort of, they want to start promoting different alternatives, you know. Obviously you have the very vocal ones like Leonardo DiCaprio, who's very environmentally conscious, and George Clooney and others like that. These are kind of the A-listers, but there's a whole lot of like guys in the back that you wouldn't, like producers and directors who are thinking along these lines as well. So it's a good possibility that we can maybe make this movie. You know, it's dependent on raising finance, of course. That will be the biggest object. But there is a possibility that it could be a good time for us. You know, so we're really excited about that. Actually, the book or the story itself is basically about it's about a guy who sort of creates this countdown clock. He says, okay, we're going to have a world without money, and I'm going to set a date. Okay, it's going to happen on this date. And he just picks a date out of midair, and then basically the whole story unfolds as to how it actually counts down to that date. And it's quite an exciting, dramatic story. So it's good. It has a sort of a tension going throughout. So as this countdown timer is going, so it has lots of really good supportive comments and stuff about it. Lots of people excited about this story. So yeah, I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic that maybe we can make this movie, but it still remains to be seen. We're running like a little bit of the first act of the screenplay is done now.
Up now, as Fusion might have been aware, there was a bit of the sound was going a little bit at the end there. His voice was breaking up a little bit, so I'll just recap on some of them things. I'm not even sure how much of this I'm going to include in it, but you're speaking about his 2 books. One of them being the Into the Open Economy, which is available for free download on Amazon, which is amazing. You know, how many opportunities do we get for free stuff? And he's obviously living by his words and willing to, you know, put his money where his mouth is, but it isn't money anymore, is it? And of course, the second book, which is F-Day, the Second Dawn of Man. And it sounds really exciting, very interesting. That'd be great if that gets turned into a film one day. And then, of course, his 2 sites. You can go onto the Free World Charter website. You can basically sign up, basically put your name on it. I remember I did it about a month or 2 ago when I first heard about Colin and the Free World Charter. Almost like you're taking a vote, you're voting for this kind of world, and whether it happens in our lifetime or it's just a pipe dream. But I think the more that we set our intentions towards the kind of world that we want to live in, and our actions are very much a part of that, a massive part of that. We might think, oh, something like that will never happen. It can't happen. You know, there's too many things in the way. But actually, only takes a few of us actually to make big shifts and to go down different directions. So sign up on there. There's also, is it ShareBay, where I think there's about 2,000 people on there now, where we can share our skill set and we can ask for other people to do things for us and just do it all without the exchange of money, all based on us being willing to contribute, willing to share. And I know from my own life, when I've done stuff like that, like, you know, the way the universe works, the way the law of attraction works, like almost like things just come back to you magically. So anyway, I've really enjoyed this chat. I'm feeling really energized from it. And so if you've listened to this, if you've enjoyed it, please share this episode with a friend. I'd really appreciate that. If you are listening to it on YouTube, you can subscribe to this channel so you never miss an episode. I'm also doing a mailing list now, so if you want to sign up on that, I'll start including links to the mailing list, so you can. That's probably the best way to stay informed on this podcast, because you know, sometimes if you're on social media or things can get missed. And if you enjoy this and you want to become a member, you can join my Patreon page. For as, you know, little as the price of a cup of coffee each month, you can become a member and help me to continue to put this content out there. Even though I say in this podcast, like, I love to do this for free, and I would continue to. However, I would love this to be a part of me transitioning to, you know, doing something like this full time. But of course, I have this house to pay for, and I have other things to pay for. So there's obviously a balance and stuff. And you guys, if you're willing to come along on that journey with me, support me, then that would be amazing. But anyway, guys, until next time, have a good one.